All right, we're going to continue our histology slides. And so once again, we're going to be returning to the epithelial tissues. Remember, epithelial tissues line skin surfaces, or they line cavities or cover the body, so like the surfaces of the skin. So usually for an epithelial slide, you'll see an area of white on the slide, so next to the free edge, or you might see a lumen on the inside. And then the tissue right next to that white space is going to be the epithelial tissue we're looking at. So once again, to talk about the classification, we've already talked about squamous, simple and stratified. We've talked about cuboidal, simple and stratified, and now we're going to move on to columnar epithelial tissue. So columnar epithelial tissue, we have a couple of different, we have simple columnar, stratified columnar, and pseudo-stratified columnar, which is a type of simple. It's really only one layer, but it kind of looks like it's multiple layers, as well as these have some things we call cell surface modifications. So they may have cilia, they may have microvilli, or they may have goblet cells also, or specialized unicellular gland. So we'll go into looking at the columnar epithelium. So first we're going to start with simple columnar epithelium. So this is an example of simple columnar epithelium from the common bile duct. And we can see here, right, this is the lumen of the duct over here. This is that white area, so the tissue right next to it is what we're looking at. Down here is going to be the basement membrane, and all this down here is going to be connective tissue. And so we can see that we have these tall cells. These cells are taller than they are wide, so they're going to be called columnar, and it's one layer of them, and the nuclei are, nicely lined up. This is an area of the slide that's just cut a little bit off, but you can see in these areas, you can see there's just a single layer of them in the areas where the slide is it's cut on the right plane. And so this here is going to be just simple columnar epithelium, and there's one layer of cells, and the cells are taller than they are wide. Now we also have, this is the ileum, which is part of your small intestine. And so this is another example of simple columnar epithelium, but it has a couple of other interesting things. This can be a little confusing because there are lots of folds in the intestines. And so this part here, this is going to be the lumen. And so we can look here, this is one layer, but there's also a fold. So it goes up and it kind of comes down. Here's more. These are single layers of epithelium that are just folded on each other. And so it might look like you have like two different layers, but this is a layer here and it folds, and then it's here and it folds, and here and it folds. So each of these is a single layer of epithelium, right? We can see that the cells are taller than they are wide. Some of the nuclei are elongated a little bit, some of them are round. And we can see that they have these cells right here. So they kind of look like a little bit like a stemless wine goblet. And they are goblet cells, so they're mucin-secreting unicellular glands. And so this is going to be a goblet cell here, this is one here, this is one here. So all these little sort of non-staining cells are goblet cells. You may see some other preparations with different stain that is going to stain them more of a purple color, but in this case they are more unstained. And we can see this goblet cell is spewing out some mucus. So this is goblet cells. The other thing we can see on here is that this is part of the intestine, and the job of the intestine is for absorption, and one of the ways it does that is by having these microvilli to increase the surface area for absorption. So this guy right here, you see how there's a darker line here? This is sort of where the edge of the cell is, and then this little fuzzy border area here, it's also called the brush border. This is going to be the microvilli, and so these are microvilli on top. You can see they go around, and they're a little bit hard to notice. You can't see any individual little hair-like projections. And so this is where the microvilli are anchored right here to the surface of the cell, and then we have the short little microvilli here. So they're pretty short, you almost can't even tell they're there. So this is going to be simple columnar epithelium with goblet cells and microvilli. Next, we're going to talk about another type of simple columnar epithelium. And this is a simple columnar epithelium from the oviduct. So lining the oviduct. Remember, one of the things the oviduct is going to have to do is it has these cells with cilia on them. And these cilia, that's these little guys right here, you can really see individual little hair-like projections. And we can see the individual hair-like projections. They're longer than the microvilli. They're a little bit more individualized. Those are cilia. And these cilia are going to be beating. And so they're going to be beating so that the egg, right? The egg doesn't have a flagellum like the sperm does. The egg is going to be, they're going to help beat so that the egg can move its way down the oviduct and into the uterus. So once again, this is a layer, a single layer. So this is the basement membrane here. This is all connective tissue inside the oviduct. So this is one layer of cells that are taller than they are wide. So these are going to be simple columnar epithelium. And then here we have this little area here where the cilia are attached to the edge of the cell, and then this is going to be the cilia. So this is going to be simple columnar epithelium with cilia. And this is found in the oviduct. The next thing we're going to really briefly mention, if we go back to our classifications of epithelium, is stratified columnar, which is a little bit less common, and there's actually not a slide of stratified columnar in the cool slide box, the virtual slide box I'm looking at. So I just pulled up an image of it so we can talk about it. And so this is going to be stratified columnar. It looks a lot like simple columnar, but you can see that there's like another layer under there. So this is like a second layer of nuclei. This is the first layer of nuclei. It's a little bit more organized than pseudostratified, which we'll see in a second. This is found in portions of the male urethra, but it's not quite as common, so we might not see it as often. But this is going to be stratified columnar. So we have cells that are taller than they are wide, and then we have, obviously, like right here is a good one. You can see one nuclei and then a second nuclei. So we have some areas where you have a nuclei directly on top of the other nuclei, and it looks a little bit more organized than we'll see the pseudostratified columnar. All right, so now we're going to move on to pseudostratified columnar. Pseudostratified columnar is actually, pseudo means falsely, so it's falsely stratified. There's actually only one layer of epithelium, but because the cells are all different shapes and they're all they're not like uniformly columnar. Some of them go all the way from the basal surface to the lumen, and some of them don't. And this looks really confusing and complicated, and there's lots of layers and everything kind of mushes together. Pseudostratified columnar is just very messy looking. I like to say it's very messy looking. This is going to be part of the trachea. It's really common in the trachea, so that's and it's a common slide that we're going to see. You will probably see a pseudostratified epithelium. It's very possible you might see that on a quiz or a test. So as we can see here, these cells are tall, right? They're taller than they are long, and it's really hard to tell the difference between stratified and pseudostratified. But no, in the trachea like this, it's going to be pseudostratified. And the other thing is that you have some goblet cells in here. Let's see if we can find another good goblet cell. There's some goblet cells. Right here is a goblet cell. And then these guys right over here are going to be cilia. Let's see. And so you can see the cilia pretty well right here. And see, once again, you can see it's sort of a darker line where it's attached down here, and then we have you can sort of see the individual hairs of the cilia. And these cilia are going to be part of the mucociliary escalator, and they're actually beating up so that the mucus that's kind of going down into your lungs, and then dust and everything is going to get trapped in that mucus, and then the cilia are going to try to beat it up so it can go back up to the mouth and you can cough it out, and it doesn't get stuck in the lungs. And so this part is going to be part of your respiratory epithelium that we'll talk more about in our respiratory section when we get to 169. So this is one example of pseudostratified columnar epithelium. We're also going to look at this one is also another example of the trachea with pseudostratified columnar. This one has really pretty cilia. You can really see the individual strains here. You can kind of see how it's just messy looking. It doesn't really look like it's just very jumbled and messy, and it has the cilia over here too for pseudostratified. And then finally we can find it in places other than the trachea. This is the larynx, right? It's pretty close to the trachea though, right? It's just above it. But this is going to be the false vocal cord, and it's covered by a pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And looks pretty tall over here. There are scattered goblet cells in there also secreting mucin, and then we've got this nice cilia again. So with the pseudostratified columnar epithelium, you're often going to see them with cilia and goblet cells, right? Because it's pretty common in the respiratory tract as part of their respiratory membrane, and we need that cilia and those goblet cells for that mucociliary escalator. All right, so that is about it for pseudostratified, for columnar epithelial tissues.